if you go through your life and you're never compelled to do something, then you deserve another turn. I was compelled to do that treasure story. Always been somewhere in my past, my ancestors, there's a pirate. I love treasures. I love to find things. There's the thrill of the chase. You know, you can't sum it up better than that. There's a thrill in doing it. That's what gold mining is all about. That's what arrowhead hunting is all about. A lot of fun. Fly fishing is a way of life. You know, it's like there were just several things in my life that I was consumed by. You know, if you've never been consumed by something, then you really missed your turn. But I wanted a foundry, so we acquired this building where Fenn Galleries is now, and I was going to run the big gallery, and my partner was going to run his store over there. But we were partners in the whole thing.
How'd you get involved with the CIA?
Who told you about that?
I've read it.
In mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, for the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are never what they seem. Now wait a minute, what is this thing?
It's just an audio recorder.
Is this a pretty good one?
Yeah.
How much do you pay for it?
I don't know, $100, $150.
Because I need one. I want one here if the Park Service comes to see me. I want to record all that. I mean, what's your sentence? You get 30 days in jail, or you get 20 years, or what do you get for digging a 12-inch hole in Yellowstone Park? I mean, I think we should keep these things in perspective. The thrill of the chase book was personal. The rest of it was business. I made money theoretically in all of my books except the thrill of the chase, and I'm going to lose a bunch on that.
Yeah.
but it's a different time frame. My mindset is different. My age is different, and my motives are different.
Forrest Fenn. You may have watched videos or read articles about Forrest Fenn and his treasure hunt over the years. This is different. We have audio and video never publicly released. You just saw a small sample of the pictures, interviews, and news stories from Forrest Fenn. The information is from 2011 to now. To be clear, these are not searcher stories. This is from the man himself. The themes are Yellowstone, fishing, the chase, and the Maverick. It's over 3 hours long, and yes, you will hear about the treasure too. So sit back and get ready. K-Pro and Cowlazars presents Chasing the Maverick, for searchers by searchers. To say Forrest Fenn was a fisherman is an understatement. Fishing was in his soul, passed down from his father. From fishing Yellowstone and surrounding areas to becoming a fishing guide at a young age, fishing was Forrest's first thrill of the chase.
Do you remember, say, the first fish you caught with your dad?
Do I remember the first fish?
With your dad, yeah.
You mean the first 60,000 fish? No, I don't remember, but I was fishing at age 6 and 7. But I couldn't, you know, before they had, they were making rods out of split bamboo. Six pieces of bamboo they put together, and it took a real craftsman to make a good split bamboo rod. but they had these old metal rods that were hollow and they were easy to break, you know, and you break your rod and now you got to go home, and it's a terrible thing. And they had electric reels where you pull the trigger and the spring pulls it. Well, that wasn't any good either. It's hard to beat an Orvis or an old. My first good fly rod I had was a Granger Victory. It cost $25, and $25 was $1 million to me in those days. But I loved that sport, and I bought a brand new Granger Victory rod and a Fluker Medalist reel. And boy, that was top drawer. That was high rent district for me in those days. And you cannot get a better reel than this kind. It's simple. It never stops working, and it's a thing of beauty, I think. I mean, it's fishing. And my father, we always wanted to fish streams when we could. We fished Hebgen Lake a lot and all the other lakes, but it's a good way to fish a lake is to get in a boat and fish it, throw your fly in toward the bank and pull it out into the lake, rather than get your waders on and wade out and fish in the lake. And we did all of that. But there were places up around West Yellowstone, Rumbaugh Creek, Watkins Creek, where these little streams, 10, 12 feet wide with fast running water, would dump into Hebgen Lake, bringing fresh food in from upstream. Those big old lunkers, they love that, where fresh water is dumping into Hebgen Lake. And we used to go up to Avalanche Lake. Toughest trip in the world. You know, you go from about 6,000 feet to 11,000 in a period of 6 or 7 miles of trail. You never stop going up. It's very difficult. I took my wife up there one time on horseback, and the trail wasn't maintained. The Forest Service didn't do a good job in there, and the trees fall over the trail. So Peggy is not a natural born horsewoman, but the horse knew how to jump over the tree, and Peggy's sitting on this horse wondering what she's going to do next. All of a sudden the horse jumps over the tree, and Peggy, she's a trooper. She didn't fall off, but she didn't like it at all. And we'd get up to about a mile or so short of Lost Lake was a little lake. It wasn't Avalanche. Avalanche Lake is the same lake as Lost Lake. We call them both names, but there was a little lake there where we could rest the horses and take a break, eat our lunch. And it was a little lake about maybe 10 acres, but it was full of Arctic grayling, very protected fish now, endangered species. And the way you fish for grayling is you take your fly rod and you throw a woolly worm out there about 30 feet into this lake and just let it sit there. In a minute, the fly will sink down maybe 18 inches or 2 feet deep, and you just watch your line that's floating. All of a sudden you'll see the line do this. As soon as you see the line move, you set the hook, you caught an Arctic grayling. That's the way you catch those things.
Now, I've never had a grayling. Are they bony?
They're bony. They're not a pretty fish. They have a big dorsal fin on the top that looks like a sail. And I never did much like to fish for them. I think the best part of Arctic grayling is that it's endangered species, you know, and it was kind of magic to catch one of them. Let me let my dog in. Come in, Cody. But I used to guide. I was a professional guide when I was 12. And I knew wherever fish was up there, you know, the fire hole, there was an earthquake up there in 1959. And until that time, the fire hole was a great river to fish in. But the earthquake opened some fissures that allowed warm water or hot water, geyser water, to dump into the Firehole River. So after 1959, when the earthquake was, you have to stop fishing the Firehole River about, I don't know the date, middle of June or something, because the water's too hot. The fish are not in it. Too hot. Trout like cold water. The colder the better. And so I think today they even close the river when the water gets too hot for fish. But we used to walk. The good thing about Lost Lake was that on the east side of the lake there were huge rocks, the size of a big garage, 30 feet above the water, and a lot of them. And you could get up on one of those rocks and look down, the crystal clear water, look 30, 40 feet down, and you see those big golden trout. A big golden trout is about 8 pounds or so. You see those big things swimming around down there, and you just cannot stand it because you can't catch them. I went up there the first time. We didn't catch a fish, and we were getting ready to leave, and I couldn't find out. I could throw a fly down there, couldn't see my leader. There's no reason for that fish not to take my fly. He'd go up to it, look at it, and swim away. Could not understand that. And we were getting ready to leave, and I had a Coca-Cola, a bottle of Coca-Cola, that I put under a rock on Lost Lake, because the next time I was going to go up there, I was going to drink my Coke. It was going to be good and cold. We're talking about 11,000 feet altitude and water really cold. But I turned a rock over to hold my Coca-Cola in place so that the current didn't move it. And I saw freshwater shrimp on the bottom of that rock. I said, that's the mistake I've made. So I went home, and we're talking about a number 18 hook, a fourth of an inch long, trying to tie a fly on a hook that's a 14th of an inch long. But I had to have a body that looked like a freshwater shrimp, which was, it was kind of a pink body, but it was translucent. You could hold up the latch, you could see through those things. The shrimp were a quarter of an inch long, but there were lots and lots of them. So I went home and I looked all around for something I could use. Finally, I found there was some kind of commercial plastic I found accidentally in a 5 and dime store one time. I said, that's what I want. You could mold it onto a hook with a catalyst, some kind of like a fingernail polish remover. It wouldn't melt it, but it would make it soft, and you could firm it around that hook. And the next time I went up to Avalanche Lake or Lost Lake, I had about 20 or 30 of those little things, and let me tell you, I caught about 6 of the most wonderful fish. Golden trout is a beautiful fish. It's not fun to eat because they're very oily. I never did like to eat golden trout, so we never did take one home. We ate 1 or 2 while we were up there. And as far as I know, the only fish in that lake was golden trout. Golden trout is a Rolls Royce of fish.
Because they're difficult to catch.
And they're up above 9,000 or 10,000 feet. They can't live at 7,000 feet, I don't think. 9,000, 10,000 feet. And they're never in great abundance. But they can get big, and boy, the thrill I used to feel standing way up on top, 20 feet above the water, and looking 30 or 40 feet deep down in Lost Lake, and see those big we called them lunkers. And they were lunkers too. And they just totally ignored us. We had to be careful because Lost Lake is right in the middle of grizzly country. So you didn't catch a fish and take it back to your camp, unless you're going to cook it right now, because grizzly bears like trout. And that was before we had pepper spray or anything, you know.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of fun. Fly fishing is a way of life, you know. It's like there were just several things in my life that I was consumed by. You know, if you've never been consumed by something, then you really missed your turn. I've been consumed by collecting arrowheads and fishing. And up in Yellowstone on Hebgen Lake, this buddy of mine up there, we'd get in a canoe at first light and go in come around a corner of this lake into a little cove, and when we came around the corner, there's a big moose there with a calf feeding, or there are 20 or 30 mallards they see us and they take off, you know, and geese. I mean, it's just absolutely wonderful. And strawberries, the strawberries that grow all around the south side of Hebgen Lake. They're small. They're like smaller than a ½ inch, but they're everywhere. And blueberries. And we used to go out, these blueberry bushes grow close together. You could find a colony of blueberry bushes that was 100 feet around, 200 feet around. There's a big black bear here feeding on blueberries. There's a big black bear feeding here on blueberries. And my father and wife and 3 kids are picking blueberries right in between these bears. Nobody bothered anybody. You don't do that with grizzly bears. But I never saw a grizzly bear eating blueberries. But we knew where all the strawberries were and all the blueberries. There was a joke when I was a kid. What color is a blueberry when it's green? A blueberry is red when it's green. And then when it ripens, it turns blue. So that was the joke. That was a big deal.
Now, was your grandfather a fisherman too?
What?
Was your grandfather a fisherman?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But not like me and my father.
He wasn't a guide or anything?
No.
How did your dad get into that? Do you know?
In the cabin business?
Into guiding.
Well, he was a fisherman from being a kid. He fished all over Texas and Mexico and places, and so that's why he liked Yellowstone so much, was the fishing. He was a real fisherman. And my grandfather, old Carl Simpson, C.K. Simpson, they would compete for the best fishing spot. The one that got up the earliest got to the fishing spots. And there was lots of secrecy going on, and it was serious. It wasn't a joke.
Huh.
And if my dad beat old Carl Simpson up to the slow bend or the water hole or the 9 Mile hole or some of those, well, my grandfather was mad. I was a fishing guide at ages 12 and 13 in West Yellowstone. I took fishermen out in Yellowstone Park and around the lakes and rivers around West Yellowstone, Hebgen Lake and all the rivers, and there's a lot of places to fish up there. And when I was a little kid, I knew every fish by name. There was Phyllis and John and Mabel and
But people paid you money to help them learn how to catch fish.
well, I could do that. Yeah, I knew wherever fish was in Montana, certainly around West Yellowstone and Yellowstone National Park and the Gallatin National Forest. Those rivers and lakes, I mean, that was my thing. You know, I could have been a professional fishing guide even today up there. I used to do would go out on a stream and sit on the bank and see if there are any fish rising, coming up for bugs, particularly mayflies and caddis and different types of bugs, and see what the hatch is. It depends on the time of day, how warm it is. A lot of these hatches that come out of the water, they're born in the water. They come to the surface, larvae, and they fly away. And then a lot of times they land on the water again, particularly mayflies. I love mayflies. So we would watch what was happening with the hatch, and we'd tie a fly sitting right there on the side of the stream that would imitate whatever the fish were feeding on. Worked very well. And my father was such a purist that he would see a fish feeding, and that's the one he wanted. There's a bigger one right here, but he wanted that particular fish, and he guided some people that were pretty severe dry fly fishermen, and it's not enough to catch a fish. I want to catch that fish. And you watch him come up, the same fish will come up in the same area 4 or 5 times. Then you see what that fish is feeding on. You tie a fly to match it, you throw it out there once, maybe twice. If you don't get him, you sit on the bank and you rest the fish for a while. You don't want to spook the fish. So in a minute you see he's still feeding. The hatch is not going to last but an hour, maybe an hour and a half. So you watch him. The fish will feed upstream. If it's a good hatch, lots of bugs, he'll feed upstream. So, and you get to know the fish. You can tell that that's the same fish that's feeding the same spot, and you can see the same fish will feed upstream maybe 10, maybe 20 feet, and you go after that one specific fish. That's what the purist does. That's what my father was. I was not nearly that extreme, you know. Fish is a fish to me, but we always caught fish. And when I was a kid, you know, my father was down teaching school down in Texas, making $4,000 a year. We'd go to Yellowstone. In those days, if the fish was over 10 inches, we kept it, because the fish that we couldn't eat ourselves, we would trade for bread or tomatoes or potatoes or whatever the guy we were trading with, what he had to trade, and that's what kept us going. We'd come home with, there were always plenty of fish, particularly in Hebgen Lake. Now on the Madison River, the Firehole, the Gallatin, a lot of those, the Gibbon, Slough Creek, it's catch and release, depending on where you are. And so the numbers of big fish are greater than they were when I was up there in the 1940s. Where you catch a fish and you release it, I mean, they'll get, largest one I ever saw in the Madison River, I think, was like 26 inches. That was a huge fish. In the old days, we measured them by the pound, not by the inch. But nowadays they measure fish by an inch, and that's a better way to do it than by the pound.
Was that a rainbow at 26?
Rainbow, brown, brook trout. Some of the lakes have grayling, Arctic grayling. Greep Lake was great for Arctic grayling, and some of the lakes like Cliff Lake and Wade Lake, you catch lake trout. Lake trout are deep. You know, you go down 20, 30, 40 feet for lake trout, and they get huge. You know, they get, I don't know how big, 20, 30 pounds. And
is there different techniques for, say, New Mexico than there would be for Yosemite?
not for trout. Well, not for any kind of fish, really. All of these flies that you make will catch perch. Perch are easy. Crappie, I don't know that I ever caught a crappie on a fly. You fish for crappie with live minnows. And catfish will eat anything. You know, the world's record catfish was caught on a bar of soap.
But your dad was a purist. He wouldn't fish with bait, would he?
Fish for what?
Would your dad fish with bait?
With bait?
Yeah.
For catfish and sure, some kind of fish. Catfish normally won't take a fly. I've caught them on a fly, but generally speaking, catfish are bottom feeders. And anything that smells bad, catfish will eat it. We used to make stink bait. And we used to make, because you have trouble keeping the bait on a hook, we would make stink bait and mix it in with cotton balls. So you put a cotton ball on your hook, it'll stay there because cotton has some fibers on it, and there's a group of fishermen that experiment all over. They discovered a number of years ago that WD-40 was it smelled, fish like the smell. For catfish, what people would do is put cottonseed hulls, the leftovers from making cotton cloth. The residue is what's called cottonseed hulls. It smells really good. They put it in a big gunny sack or a tow sack, tie it real tight, put some rocks in it, and dump it in the lake someplace where they wanted to fish. Well, of course, the catfish come over there. They're baiting the fish, and then I've seen catfish rabid around those places where you could just catch them with almost anything.
What are some of the favorite places that you have to fish?
Well, we fished all up down the Madison River, the Firehole River, the Gibbon, the Gallatin, the Yellowstone. The trouble with Yellowstone Lake and Yellowstone River is they don't have big fish. You know, if you catch a 16-inch fish in Yellowstone Lake or in Yellowstone River, that's a big fish.
Why is that?
I don't know. The cutthroat was introduced into Yellowstone Lake in the 1800s, and it was the only fish in the lake. And they multiplied like crazy. The Yellowstone Lake is really cold water. You don't swim in Yellowstone Lake, but 2 or 3 minutes. You got to get out. But somebody about 30 or 40 years ago dumped some lake trout in there. The National Park Service is really angry with whoever did that, for good reason. Lake fish eat the young cutthroat trout. And the cutthroat trout is what the grizzlies and the eagles and the ospreys and all those animals feed on, otters. And eventually, Yellowstone Lake won't have any cutthroat in it at all. It'll be lake trout. And they hate that. Yeah. And if they ever found out who put those lake trout in there, well, they'd probably put them under a jail someplace.
They let you fish and keep lake trout, don't they?
Yeah, the rule up there says if you catch a lake trout and you don't want it, throw it up on the bank. Don't put it back in. Of course, it doesn't make any difference. You know, if there's 2 million lake trout in Yellowstone Lake and you catch one, it doesn't matter what you do with that fish. But they're good eating fish. They get big. You know, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I think 20 pounds. And you catch them deep, 40, 50 feet.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, trout fishermen want to catch rainbow, brown, brook trout. It's hard to catch a big brook trout.
What about the cutthroat?
Cutthroat is a rainbow. It just happens to have a red mark under its gills, but the cutthroat and the rainbow and Dolly Varden, and you know the cutthroat is really a colloquial name, and so is fishermen call fish by different names. You know, everybody has their pet name.
Yeah.
But there weren't a lot of fishermen in the 1940s when I was growing up. Not like today. I mean, there are almost no female fishermen in those days. Now there are lots of female fishermen and catch fish. Lots of books been written on that subject, and I love those old books that show. There's nothing more beautiful to me than a nice stream making a turn around a bank, and the blue-green water. I know that it's 6 or 7 feet deep there, and I know that there's probably 4 or 5 fish in there that going to measure 21, 22 inches, 17, 18 inches. Nice fish, but for me, catching a big fish was okay once in a while, but I like the small streams like the Gibbon River dumps into the Madison, and it's it's 10 feet wide, and you know the places where it's 12 inches deep, but it'll go around a bank in nice blue water. There's always fish in there that are 10 inches. A big one is 12 inches. It's fun to catch those little things. You always turn them loose. You fish with a hook that you bend the barb down so that and a lot of times when you catch a fish, you don't want to play him forever because it tires the fish out, can kill the fish. Well, I'm going to tie, I can tie about, you know, what I always like to do is make up my own flies. The woolly worm was a good fly to use for trout, and so is a squirrel tail. So one time I made a woolly worm squirrel tail, and it really caught fish, and everybody started copying it. This is a size 6 hook. I'm gonna make a woolly worm. So first thing I'm going to do is put some wool. I need a red tail. Okay, that's my red tail. I'm going to cut it off about right there. Then I'm going to tie on some chenille. I use this larger stuff. Tie that on good and tight. This is going to be the body of the fly. Now I need some hackle. This is a really good chicken neck. You see these saddle hackles?
Yeah.
This is as good as you get. This was my father's neck. I call them necks. And these are called saddle hackles. I'm going to take the fuzz off of the end there. Then I'm going to tie it onto this hook and run it all the way up to the front because I want to tie it really good. Now I'm going to run the chenille up. Good. I'm going to cut the chenille off. There's always a little stuff there that doesn't get tied in. Then I'm going to run my hackle up.
Huh.
I'm going to tie the hackle in. I'm going to pull that off. Now I have to cut, there's a few feathers sticking out front, so I'll take those off. Now, my tail's not looking too good. I'm going to make the head of the fly. Okay, everything's tied in tight. Now I'm going to have what's called a whip finish. I'm a little bit rusty. Okay, now I'm going to pull that tight. Now I'm going to cut the thread off. My tail got wrapped around the body there a little bit too much. There, that's good.
Yellowstone was more than a special place to Forrest. It was a place of wonder and exploration. His father hid things in Yellowstone which had to leave an impression. From trips as a child to his family building cabins and starting a business. As an adult, Forrest went back to Yellowstone as much as possible. In his pilot days, he would fly low over Yellowstone looking for secret places.
He hid a lot of things in Yellowstone Park. And it wasn't very far from the west gate. It was a couple of miles. He'd pull off the road and drive out a quarter of a mile through the trees. There's no road there or anything. And he would leave things for the winter. And next summer when they went to Yellowstone, he'd go in there and he'd pick those things up and take them back to town. And I remember there was a problem because animals would get in there in the wintertime. He put a big tarp on top of everything that covered everything. There were very few airplanes around in those days. I don't think anybody ever saw that. It wasn't a big deal. The Park Service would probably say, "No, you can't do that," but it was. Nobody got hurt by it, and it was just one of those things. Everybody was doing things like that, not only my father, but, you know.
They had no reason to look for it either.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't in a place where folks would run into it. Why not leave stuff in the cabins?
We didn't have a cabin.
Oh, this was but it was...
I don't remember why my father was leaving stuff there. We lived in a tent at Fishing Bridge.
Right.
In the early 30s. I don't remember much about that, but when we moved over to West Yellowstone, I must have been about 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, something like that. And we had I don't remember. We had I had a cabin all to myself. Skippy had a cabin, and June had a cabin, and my parents had a cabin in a little block of land there. That was about a quarter of an acre or something. And we had no running water, but we had electricity, but we had no heat or running water. Just a cabin. I had a bed in there, and that's how we lived for the summer, and it was very enjoyable.
And so your mom and dad bought this property with those little cabins on it?
Well, the cabins were on runners. They weren't affixed to the ground. They were on big log runners. You could hook a pickup truck to it and tow it someplace else. And I'm sure my father got those things somewhere around town and pulled them over to our land and parked it there.
Okay. But then he started building cabins too.
He wanted some income, so he started Fenn Haven Motel. In the early days, motel was a word that came along later. They were cabin camps at that time. My grandfather on my mother's side had Simpson Cabin Camp. He had about 8 or 10 cabins that he rented to tourists. And so my father started accumulating those things, but it wasn't a big deal. I think he may have had 5 or 6 rental units that my mother would change the sheets, and while my father was guiding people. And then at night, when the tourists came out of Yellowstone Park, my father was there, and they'd rent. And in those days, a guy wants to, your family wants to pull up in a car, you want to rent a cabin for the night. You took them down and showed them the cabin. Here's the key, there's a ice box over there and different things. Then they decided whether they wanted to rent it or not. Today, you don't get to look at what you're renting. You pay for it and you go and you take what you get, because they're all pretty much alike. In those days, they were all different. And I remember when my brother and Donnie Joe and I built the Dude in West Yellowstone, Montana, and it was, and I was still in the Air Force, but I'd take leave and go up there, and sometimes I'd sit on the desk and rent cabins to people. And I remember these big, on several occasions, these big guys drive up in a big Cadillac and get out. They want to look at the cabin and look under it and see if the sheets are clean and all that, and give you and hassle you. And then the next guy drives up in a pickup truck with a wife and with 3 or 4 kids, and I'd rent him a cabin. You want to look at it? No, that's okay. I don't want to look at it. The difference in personalities and the way people looked at life, it's a wonderful study in anthropology.
I suppose too, sometimes they're just happy to have a place. I mean, you guys must have sold out, and all the other places in town must have sold out too.
Well, there was a network up there. When you filled up, people are still coming in wanting a cabin. You'd call your friend down the road. Do you have something for 3 people? Yeah, and then you'd send them down there, and then if they rented it, they'd call back. Thanks for sending those people down. I mean, that was a way of life. Everybody's helping everybody else.
Yeah.
But it was life or death until you filled up. We were competitors until you filled up. But once you did, why, the utopia was to fill up for the night and put your no vacancy sign out. So,
Well, that must have been some pretty good additional income for your parents.
yeah.
And they didn't do
But
that.
when we built the Dude Motel, and my brother Skippy built it almost all by himself, about 6 or 7 units, including one upstairs over the office. He did that. He built that thing by himself, except when he had to order cement or something like that, people helped him. But he built that thing all by himself. And I remember when we were making decisions of what are we going to name it. Well, we had all sorts of names. Everybody threw something out, and I finally said the Dude, and they said, okay, yeah, that's a good name, the Dude. But what are we going to charge for a room? So Donnie Joe and I went around town asking different motels how much you charge for a room, and we wanted to be the most expensive motel in town. We were the newest, so we wanted to be the most expensive. So we decided we're going to charge $16 a night. That was the most expensive room in town in the 1960s, early 1960s.
It was like 1962 or something.
62, 3, and 4, and then we sold it.
Huh. And you also built, wasn't there a restaurant or a bar next door?
We built a bar and a restaurant next door, but we sold that right away because we didn't want to be in the bar business. I think it was Skippy's idea to build that thing, but we didn't keep that very long.
Were you all involved in it financially?
I was involved financially. The rest of them, I mean, Skippy didn't have any money, but he built it. And Donnie Joe, we kept telling Donnie Joe that he was the supervisor. I mean, there was nothing to supervise, but I think we just let him be a partner because he was such a good friend. He later married my sister. But Donnie Joe was never known to do anything. I mean, he was really, everybody loved Donnie Joe, but his stepfather had an old station wagon, but the station wagon was one of those things that had wood on the outside of it. Remember those?
Yeah.
I don't remember what kind it was, but we'd get in that station wagon, Donnie Joe and we'd get on those old dirt roads around West Yellowstone that just went on for miles through the canyons and around, and we'd be about 20 miles out of town someplace just driving, and And Donnie Joe said, "My God, I got to have a cup of coffee." I mean, he was. I mean, I thought he was going to die. You know, get a cup of coffee. So it's his father's car. So we're driving about 3 times the speed limit down those little gravel roads that were about 8 feet wide to the closest coffee shop, you know, to the closest cafe. I mean, in those, I don't know the difference between a cafe and a restaurant, but in West Yellowstone they were cafes. but we'd get out of the car and run in there and order a cup of coffee, and Donnie Joe, it's cold, and Donnie Joe's holding the cup in his hand and smelling, but it didn't take a sip. I mean, maybe 5 minutes before he takes a sip. I mean, we drove 100 miles an hour to get there, and now he's holding it and smelling it. I mean, he was a connoisseur.
Absorbing the warmth and the aroma.
Yeah. I always thought that was so funny.
Did your mom ever serve food at the cabins or anything?
No, I don't think so.
You didn't have a dining room?
No, we didn't.
So.
But one time, I was a little kid, and my mother was inside the door was open, but the screen was closed, and my mother was doing something just inside the house, and I was 5 or 6 feet outside the back door, and I was laughing. I'm talking about a 4 or 5, 6-year-old kid, as I recall, and my father had given me a bow and arrow set, a little bow that was about 18 inches long and some arrows that had plungers on the end. You shoot it at the wall and it'd stick on the wall. Remember those things? My mother heard me laughing, and she said, "What are you doing, Forrest?" And I said, "Oh, nothing, just shooting bears." And she laughed about that and went on about her business. But in a minute, she looked out there. I was shooting a bear cub, a little brown bear cub that had climbed a tree right there, and I was shooting my arrows. And she ran out and grabbed me right quick. I mean, it was something else. I mean, I didn't know the difference.
Well, Mama Bear probably
Yeah.
wouldn't have taken.
We had a lot of bears around there, but we never had a bear problem.
What else do you remember about the cabin life? Do you remember?
You mean the dude in our motel?
No, the cabins. I was thinking, well, either one. The dude.
Well, my dad, his cabin camp, Fennhaven he called it, appeared one at a time over a period of 4 or 5 years, one a year or something like that. I don't remember very much. I remember he remodels some of them, but that sort of thing. But he made his living really by guiding people, fishing.
Do you remember how much you got for those cabins for them?
No, I don't. I don't remember.
Probably a couple, $3 or something.
I think it was about twice or 3 times that, $8 or $10 or something.
Yeah. So when your father was guiding, did the people who he was guiding stay at the cabins?
No, they stayed where the rich people stay.
Okay.
There's Elkhorn Dude Ranch about 20 miles away, and that's where Don Hopkins always stayed. But Fred Utter and some of these California clients stayed at the expensive places around town, and that's okay. I mean, my parents always rented their cabins to, some kind of pickup truck, and usually or something like that. They weren't very expensive compared to others.
Was that ever an issue with the guys, since the folks who were guiding, he was guiding, were generally quite well off?
Yeah.
But yet he was running a cabin camp that wasn't a dude ranch. It wasn't a.
My mother pretty much ran that while he was out fishing. But what was your question?
Well, I just wondered if that was ever an issue, like the people say, oh, you know, that, well, you wouldn't know what other people said. I just wonder, I could see where, where maybe your dad would feel a little underprivileged with.
No, I don't think so. You have to remember that a cabin in West Yellowstone, Montana, is someplace you sleep in. You don't do anything. You're waiting to go in Yellowstone Park. I mean, you may spend 8 or 9 hours, but you're sleeping the whole time. I mean, you didn't. Wonderful amenities were not something that you got in my father's cabin. You got a bed and a bathroom and you got running water, but I mean it starts slowing up fast after that.
Did your mom like it out there? Oh, she must have liked it out there. But what was
she liked it there because her mother was there too. But even after that, my mother was pretty much subservient to my father. If my father wanted to do it, then my mother liked it, only because he wanted to do it. She was that's just the way she was.
Where were the Simpsons in relation to where your cabins were? Were they on the other side of town?
They were on the same side of town, about 2 or 3 blocks toward the gate.
Oh, were they on Boundary?
No, they were on a street that runs into Boundary.
Oh, like Fire Hole or...
I never did know the name of those streets.
Yeah, okay. One of those streets. But you say 3 or 4 blocks further down.
I don't think it was that far. But there's pictures in my scrapbook. Did you see?
I remember. Yeah, I have a picture of the Simpsons place, but I can't tell where it's at. You know, I was just kind of curious where it was at.
I don't remember.
And
I'm not sure that I could take you there today. Because those cabins were all log cabins, and you know, I'm sure they've been torn down and modern facilities replaced them.
Yeah. Well, when I was there with Chip, he was pretty sure one of the cabins was your dad's cabins was still there, and he showed me where he thought that was at.
Well, I probably wouldn't recognize it.
No, he and Chip said too that, you know, you have to have an imagination to picture it because it's been hammered and nailed a few different ways in the years. And that's kind of curious to me too. So did the Simpsons sell out before your dad did?
I don't remember.
And
my dad sold out to J. Smith, who was married to my mother's sister. They're the ones that bought Fenn Haven. And then they sold right away. I mean, I don't remember a lot of that time. But then my father moved over to where I had a cabin, June had a cabin. There were 4 little cabins there. That's where I dug the well, we built an outhouse, and across the street was an old house. And there was an old couple. I mean, I'd look back now and say that they were old. I mean, they were old when I was young. I don't think they were old, not like I'm old, but the 2 of them lived in that cabin. I mean, it wasn't a cabin, it was a house. It had 3 or 4, 5, maybe 6 rooms in it. But one time something came up and somebody said that there was a skunk under the Nielsen's house. And the 3 of us kids thought that was so funny. Skunk under the Nielsen's house. We laughed about that, just really laughed for a couple of days. And I don't know what was so funny about the skunk being under the Nielsen's house, but it was funny. It was not uncommon to see skunks around town, porcupines once in a while. Well, here's Yellowstone Park right here.
okay.
So it's right on Boundary Road. It's a road that runs down that way. And then I forget what this road is, but that was my grandpa's cabin camp.
Huh. And so your grandpa had one, and then later your dad built one,
Yeah, and then I built one.
and then you built one.
Yeah.
Huh. So this kind of taking care of tourists is sort of
Yeah.
runs in the family.
Strictly, I mean, 3 months a year, and then you close and go to Texas.
Yeah. But you guys didn't stay there when you went up to West.
No, we had our own place. But my grandfather and grandmother lived in the back of the office there. This is the office.
Mm-hmm. When you went out there with your dad, you just had a piece of land up there that you had put a.
We lived in a tent part of the time. There's pictures of the tents and things.
Yeah.
But later on, my dad built. He didn't really build a cabin camp, but there were a few houses there that lived close together, one or two room cabins. So he just bought a few of those and turned it into a cabin camp.
Okay.
I think he didn't have but 5 or 6 places you could rent. One of them was a house. One person could rent the front of the house, and another guy could rent the back of the house. You know,
Oh, okay.
I mean, it was a. And you know, they charged like $4 or $5 a night. Because when my brother Donnie and I built the Dude, I went around town. Donnie and I went around town pricing the most expensive places. The most expensive place in town was $15 a night. So ours were $16. We wanted to be more expensive than anybody else. So we charged $16 a night.
Did that work? Were you able to fill it up? Was that a good strategy?
Well, you pretty much fill up in the summertime, and everybody knew everybody else. So if we filled up, we'd call a roundup across the street and ask them if they had a vacancy, because we had a client for them. And if they said, yeah, well, we'd send him over there. And everybody worked together, you know.
Huh.
The season was short. It was important that you fill up every cabin every night, if you can. Of course, we didn't, but that's what you shot for.
How many, when you were at the Dude, how many rooms did you have there?
At the Dude, we had, I think, 15.
And how many did your dad have?
About 5 or 6. Then my grandfather must have had about 8. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. Must have been about 8, because there were some back behind there. What?
Chipper?
Oh, Chipper.
Chip says that he's pretty sure it was you who used to fly low over West Yellowstone.
Oh, yeah, I did that a few times. And the T-33, though.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't land an F-100 around there any place.
Because you couldn't take off again. Well, there was no runway.
No place to land.
Yeah.
That little airport there in West Yellowstone.
Oh, so you were coming there, and you would land there?
No. No. I could never land there because they didn't have fuel for me. I mean, it was not a place where you can take an Air Force a jet.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just barely a hangar there.
But you could take but if you weren't going to land, you could take an F-100 through there.
I can make a pass on it, yeah. But T-33 has a lot more fuel than you can. But I don't know any place up there where I could land. I couldn't land the F-100 at Bozeman or those places. So it was always a T-33, I'm sure. I could get a T-33 anytime I wanted it.
So you do that in the summer just to...
Well, I was not only flying over West Yellowstone, I was flying over Yellowstone Park. I wanted to, I found lakes up there that I wanted to go to that I didn't know existed. The Park Service, when you look on a map, it'll be on a map, but the Park Service doesn't want to talk about it.
Huh. There's no trail up to it or whatever. So did you go back and go fishing at some of these places?
I don't remember I ever did, but I was more interested in seeing it than I was planning to go do it. Another guy and I were going to walk one time from Fishing Bridge to Old Faithful Strait, straight across. And I flew over to look at it, and there were some pretty good mountains in between there, and we decided not to do it. But I always want to do. You can't get lost because you're inside a circle.
Yeah, eventually you got to get
Eventually
the edge.
you're going to run into a paved road.
Yeah.
But we were going to rough it, and, we weren't going to kill animals or anything like that. But as far as anybody knew, but I had one of these things. We'd have squirrels and that sort of thing, but you had to have a Park Service had to have a permit.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I think we talked to the Park Service about it, and they said, no, you can't do it. We won't let you do it.
I wonder what
Well,
if they would say that today.
First of all, they don't like you to get off a trail.
Yeah.
And secondly, it's dangerous. It would be a 2 or 3 day trip at least, probably. I don't know how many miles we're talking about, but 50 miles maybe. I don't remember, but we were going to do it just for the fun of it, and we decided not to because of the mountains.
Did you go somewhere else instead? No.
But I always like to do things like that. One of the great things I like to do in Yellowstone was to borrow some guy's canoe. The smaller the canoe, the better. And get on Hebgen Lake about 10 or 15 feet from the shore and just follow the lake. You come around a blind curve into a cove. There's 200 ducks in there. They all take off, and I love things like that. And you can see the fish. I'd stop and fish, and I used to do that all by myself.
Huh. When you were a kid, or yeah. Now, after you were in the Air Force, you continued to go back in the summers and
Every time I could, I'd go back. Yeah, sure.
and help your dad with his place and fish. Yeah. Now, the cabins that the Fenn Motor
Fenn Haven Motel.
Fenn Haven Motel, yeah. Those are the cabins that you built with your dad.
No, I never did work on them. Skippy worked on them, but I was in. I think I was in the Air Force by then, but I don't remember. But I remember I never did work on his thing.
Okay.
I don't remember working on them.
All right. And how many cabins were there at the when?
At Fenn Haven,
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess 6 or 7. One of them was on the front of the place where my parents were living. I mean,
Right.
just a bedroom, and then behind that was their bedroom and a little kitchen or something. But when I remember, we were roughing it up there. We had electricity, but we didn't have anything else. We had to pump our. I dug the well.
Right. I read that story.
And we had good water, and we had electricity, but I don't remember. Our stoves were wood stoves, and we would go out in the forest and cut wood with a handsaw and split it, and we didn't use wood to heat with. We used wood to cut with, because all the wood we had hand cut. It takes you 2 or 3 minutes to cut one log of wood, and it's hard. And then you have to carry it over to your car and put it in the trunk of your car or whatever. And we didn't want to cut green wood. First of all, you weren't allowed to cut green wood, and secondly, you couldn't burn it. But we couldn't. But I remember carrying. My father would load me up with wood, and we had a trailer on the back of our car. And we'd load the trailer up with wood.
Back in Forest Service land.
And when my dad was building one of the cabins or something, there was down on the railroad, there was a big building made out of really rough lumber. It was an old building, 30, 40, 50 years old, that they wanted torn down. So they told everybody in town that you can have the lumber if you'll come over and pull the nails out and take the lumber with you. So my father and I did that. I mean, we spent a few days just tearing this thing down, driving the nails out of it. And we saved the lumber, and then we saved the nails. So we wanted to reuse the nails. And that was hard to do because there's splinters all over that thing. I don't remember having any gloves, so I always had splinters in my hands.
Huh.
very rough lumber.
And I mean, nails couldn't have been very expensive. Why would you save them?
It doesn't have to be expensive. My father was never known to walk out of a room without turning the light off, day or night. I mean, it didn't use lights in the day, but at night. And they always tell the kids, when you walk out of the room, turn the light off.
Were you the same way?
No, I let everything run all the time. But he was more conscious of. I can afford to do that today. He felt that he couldn't afford it. The only heat in the entire house was a gas stove in one room. It gets cold in Temple.
Yeah.
In the wintertime. It gets cold. And my job was to, if you have a gas stove heating, the heat burns all the humidity out of the room, and you get sick from it, sinus problems. So my job was to keep water in the pan that sat on top of the stove that provided humidity into the room.
It was a humidifier.
And another job I had was to remove the pan of water that's under the ice box. The Iceman would. We had a little sign in our front window where the guy could see it from the street. 10 pounds, 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 25 pounds, or 50 pounds. Whatever is on top means that's how many pounds we want. So the Iceman would see that. We want 25 pounds, so he'd go to a 50-pound block of ice in the back of his truck. He'd take an ice pick and cut off 25 pounds, get his hooks, come in the kitchen door over to the ice box, open the ice box lid, and put the ice in there on a metal tray that was corrugated. And it starts to melt. The water hits the corrugation and runs down to a funnel that drops it in the pan underneath the ice box. And you needed ice every 3 or 4 days. And it was my job that when the pan got full under the ice box to take it out and go outside and pour it on the flowers. You didn't waste water.